welcome to the British Institute of Professional Photography, the Artistry House. I'm going to carry on. Paul Wilkinson, Dr. Paul Wilkinson is on the line. He's trying to make me laugh as we record this, but this is another one of our three favourite things. Good afternoon, Paul. Welcome.
How many?
Welcome.
How many? The three. That's three favourite things.
We're going to get through this, aren't we?
Yeah. But we might as well spread a little bit of joy.
Oh, well, we need some, don't we? So, no. Paul, just tell us a little bit. I've known you for, God knows, too long. And
cheers, mate.
And just tell us a little bit about where you are and what you do and how you make your living.
Well, I'm Paul. Thanks.
But you said poor then.
Poor. Well, I'm now. I'm Paul Wilkinson. I am a reasonably long-standing portrait photographer. I work somewhere between Aylesbury and Oxford. That's where our studio is based, in a little place called Hadnam. And up until fairly recently, that's how I made my living. Not so much just at the moment, but we're hoping it's all going to come round.
So one of the questions I know that we're going to ask is, why have you got so many monitors?
The thing was, when you said to record this, I just thought, you know what would be really easy? Instead of fanning around trying to find somewhere else in the studio, I'll just use the bit of our studio that I record the videos for mastering portrait photography in. It was a fairly logical, what I thought would be a simple solution. And it turned out it was anything.
How long was the setup that we just
50 minutes. It took us 50 minutes. But that's because you had to keep practicing saying, welcome to Artistry House. So
this is very true. This is very true. So yes, and tell us a little bit about, before we get into your three favourite images, about mastering portrait photography. Well,
mastering portrait photography, it stemmed from the book, which is still selling. I mean, we launched it or released it. It was published in 2014. A little book. I was asked to get involved. It wasn't my idea. My co-author, Sarah Plater. It's very confusing having two Sarahs in my life, but Sarah Plater approached me, and we thought it was a spoof email. You know, like we get so much spam mail like this. Yeah, do you want to write a book? Yeah. Sorry, Sarah's just walking past. And she emailed in, and we said, well, go on. She said she was in Aylesbury, so we'll meet. And we met, and it was legit. She really was genuinely an author. She really had a contract to write a book. The photographer they'd approached wasn't able to do it, just wasn't able to put their name to a book called Mastering Portrait Photography. And so they'd found us online, came and had a look, liked what we did, and we ended up publishing this book back in 2014. It's still out there, still selling. And off the back of that, we built a website. You know, like every book now has a companion site.
Yeah.
It wasn't really a companion site. It was more an answer to one of the problems with writing a book for a publisher is an awful lot of the stuff we wanted to put out there, we couldn't, because they had a flat plan. They told us exactly how many pages. We had to have a section on choosing a camera. You know, that wasn't really, that's not mastering portrait photography. That's buying a camera. And so the website was put together to add the technical detail, the bits and pieces behind the scenes that we couldn't fit into the book. And it's just grown and grown and grown. And there's, you know, over 1,000 members on there now from all over the world, which is lovely. People find us. We are featured in N-Photo, the Nikon photo magazine, every month.
Yep.
Just done 12 months of those. We're doing another 12 next year. We're in Professional Photo magazine, Terry Hope's beautiful magazine.
Yes.
We're online. There's the podcast, of course, and that kind of came out the side of it as well. So there's all these bits.
The podcasts are amazing, Paul. As you know, on many a journey, I listen to you with me in my ear. On the,
Is that actually on the radio, or just you can hear my voice like a mad person?
Even when I'm asleep at night, I seem to hear your voice. So. and it's great that you have a thirst for podcasts.
Cheers, mate. Thanks. Yeah. Do you know what? You're about the 30th person. Even my daughter told me that this morning. Hey, Dad, you've got a face for the radio. Cheers.
They are wonderful. So I would say to all our members, if you haven't, Mastering Portrait Photography, the podcast or the website is fantastic. Some really interesting interviews you've done there. I think you're up to about, 74 now? It's,
73. I let one...
Excuse me?
I published one on 2 days ago, number 73.
Well done. And I really do enjoy them. And we've got loads of people into it now as well to the podcast, and they're that good.
Well, I'm starting name checking. You know.
Do you want to do a bit of name checking?
No.
Okay.
Not right now.
So, the other thing that I always introduce you, slightly to embarrass you more than anything, is doctor. You are a doctor, and people don't realise that.
Just to be clear, PhD. All right, I'm not an NHS. I'm not shirking. I'm not kind of.
What are you doing?
I don't want to help. You wouldn't want me looking after your medication, that's for certain. And although in your case, I'll happily get involved. So yeah, I have a PhD.
PhD and precautions, doctor. You have to wear precautions in at this time of. I don't know where I'm going. Don't know where that's going. We'll move on. So we've asked you to prepare your three favourite images. So if you'd like to share your screen and talk us through.
That's a what?
I don't know.
Are those teeth yours?
3 weeks of lockdown. This is where we are. This is your 3 favourite images.
My 3 favourite images. Okay, well let me. Well,
use one of these monitors.
Let's assume this is going to work, because it frankly didn't earlier. So if I share the screen, what could possibly go wrong, Martin?
Well, what comes up on your screen before comes on again, we'll be in trouble.
There's nothing on there. Is this now sharing?
Yes.
Oh,
so, beautiful picture. I can see Photoshop. So yeah.
So this is, Pauline, the hardest thing, or I found the hardest thing of choosing just 3 images, is we've got countless stories and countless images to go with them. And I didn't really know in the end what to show. So I chose 3 that actually, or at least 2 of them, people would be pretty familiar with. And the reason for doing that was I get asked about them all the time because they're out there a lot in the public domain. And so I thought I'd tell those stories, but we could have chosen on a different day dozens of different images, depending on what mood I was in. But this is Pauline. Pauline, when she arrived at the studio, she was the oldest coffee consuming customer of the local espresso bar down the road. And so they'd asked if I'd take a picture of her. I can see my screen flickering here, Martin.
It's okay.
All right. You have to sort that out in post. Sort me out. Oh, it's gone now. I reckon it's at your end. You're making me flicker. So she arrived at the studio. She came. Is this going to be one of those interviews?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, then. She arrived at the studio with her daughter, and her daughter was in her 60s. And she looked me straight in the eyes, Pauline did, and she said, "I don't know why I'm here." And it was like one of those, okay, and what do I do now? And on top of that, she was 87, so she was frail and had a walking stick. And if you know our studio, you have to go up steps simply to get to the front door. And thereon after, more steps. To go anywhere in the building, more steps. So we very gently coerced her up into our studio, which of course is up the most steps and at the furthest point of the studio. And we sat her down and I said, "Would you like a cup of tea?" And we sat probably for 40 minutes drinking tea and laughing, a bit like you and I do, except with the tea, not beer. And we just chatted, right? And she didn't want to be photographed, but after about 40 minutes, you could see a look in her eyes that she knew she'd hooked me. I was the audience, not the other way around. And she told me the stories of her during the war, delivering prescriptions in war-torn London. She was from County Cork. I remember the stories because she told me them 3 times, each as if she'd never told it me before. Her short-term memory, even then, was beginning to fade. And sadly, just a couple of years ago, she did die from vascular dementia. But the stories were fascinating. She was incredible. This wily, funny, joyous lady, Irish lady, sparkling eyes, and this just laughter and life about her, even at 87. And although her short-term memory was clearly going, and she was brilliant. And after about 40 minutes, I'd already set the lights up. I knew more or less, which is unusual for me. I'm not one of those people that pre-visualizes before someone arrives. Yeah. But I had this idea in my head. If she turned up wearing dark clothing, I had this lighting rig set because I thought it'd be quicker. And it turns out it was. I think I took about 12 shots, and 2 of them, one I entered into the BIPP, one I entered into the MPA. And this one won that particular year, the MPA Portrait Photographer of the Year. And so, of course, on a number of levels, it became an image that we're known for. But the biggest thing really is, in my opinion, it's the most beautiful portrait I've ever taken. And I think as portrait photographers, we get drawn towards youth. You get that, you know, the taut skin, the slender figures, all the kind of stereotypes. But actually, this is still the most beautiful I think, the most beautiful lady I've ever photographed. I just think it's a wonderful image, and it's a lovely story.
Her eyes, Paul, are just incredible, aren't they? They say your eyes are the window to your soul.
Yeah.
And you can just see youth and mischief in their eyes.
Oh, mischief doesn't begin to describe it. And of course, there was a footnote to it, which is that the local press here, when we won the competition, we ran a quick PR run, and the local newspaper liked it so much, they ran it as a cover, a wraparound cover.
Oh, wow.
So to get permission, just to make sure, we rang Pauline and said, look, you've won, and to celebrate, and it's going in the press, would you like some copies? And she said, oh, that's a lovely idea. I'd like some from my great-grandchildren, and maybe my grandchildren, and maybe my children. I'll give you a call back of how many I want. So off she went. She came back on 47 copies. Her family tree was 47. It would have cost me less to have hired a model to take the photograph, you know. By the time we'd matted each one up and signed them and bagged them, there's this big pile of prints that went out to her and her family. But of course, you know, a great image for us. And there were things that the thing I like most about the image, you're right, it's about the character in her eyes, but it's also about the fact that you don't have to do that gnarly old fisherman kind treatment.
Yes.
It's just a black and white. It's tuned a little bit. But other than that, it's pretty much straight out of camera.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful image.
Oh,
so technically, Paul, just what, one light, two lights? Probably two, isn't it?
There's 3 lights on here. So there are 2 rim lights. You can see across her shoulders. You can see lighting on her shoulders and on her hat. And then there's 1 light on the face. And it's only because I just wanted a little bit of separation off the background, because I knew with such a dark jet black background, this wasn't an image where I wanted it to merge into it. It was an image where I wanted it to come forwards a little bit. Yeah. So I did use 3 lights. There's 2 strip lights and a big softbox on the front. Yeah.
Beautiful. Very good.
Me or her?
Sorry?
Me or her?
Yeah, she's very beautiful, yeah.
I love it when you call me beautiful.
So what have you got us... What?
Oh, you go first, Gavin.
What have you got
in English, or do I have to translate for you?
Oh.
Would you like to see what else I've got for you?
You're a northern boy as well, so don't start like that.
Would you like to see what else I've got?
As well, so that makes it even worse.
Oi. So this is Ben. I called him Charlie for years, and it was only one day we ran an open studio here the one year, and his mother happened to come in, and I said, oh, we've got this lovely picture of Charlie, to which she laughed. She said, Charlie's his brother. And I'd got his name wrong ever since I took the shot. This was one of those images where I knew I'd got it right the minute I took it, but it was a hard image to get. It was really, in that particular shoot, a family session. We were running around a garden. They had a big swimming pool. It was absolute chaos. The kids would not stay still. And at the end of the shoot, it was in the days when I was wildly optimistic about what you could do on a family shoot. I had an 8-foot Octa in the back of the car with an Elinchrom head and EL 500 or something, and some black velvet. I don't know. I don't do that anymore. You know, if you want a studio shot, come to the studio. But back then, it's like, yeah, of course I can do it. We wedged this Octa into this little study. Literally, it went from the ceiling to the floor. I mean, it just wedged in there. You could just about get out the door, but that was it. And I pegged some black velvet to the curtain rail behind this little lad, but he still wouldn't sit still. He was still just jumping around. And I they had a wicker toy box, I think, in the middle of the floor. I set him on this thing, and in a fit of pique, I said, oh God, look what your sister's doing to your little toy car down there. And he looked, I took my picture, and that was it. I got 1 shot.
Really?
It's 1 shot. But because of the room shape, and because I was using a big Octa, it has this wonderful tone to it. And there's an analogy. I used to play drums. I was a professional percussionist. And you used to play the acoustic of a room. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but when you're playing, when you're not on a PA anyway, you play the acoustic. So if it's a live sounding room, you'd play to that. If it was a very dry room, and particularly when you have an audience in, you play slightly differently. And I think that's true of photography too. You have to use the way the light moves around the room. This was a small room, and I was soaking light up at the back. But of course, I've still got 3 walls. I've got 2 walls and an Octa. And so actually the light pinging around it looked like a big patio window had lit it. And so you get this very gentle tone. He was curious about what was on the floor his sister was supposedly doing with his car. And it's just one of those images, you know. And of course, when the publishers of the book, Mastering Portrait Photography, asked for a cover image, we shot dozens of images specifically for the cover, and they kept rejecting them for one reason or another. And in the end, I sent this up. This is shot on a D100, a Nikon D100. It's a 6 megapixel image, and it's one of those images where if you blow it up a couple of meters, well, not a couple of meters, a few feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, which I have done, it still looks all right.
Yeah.
It does lose some of its definition, but it was shot on a really sharp lens, and it was shot at f8 on f11 or something, right on the sweet spot of the lens. And so actually it's still sharp. It still holds its definition, even though it's only 6 megapixels. So I sent that off to the publisher. I laid out the cover and said, I think this would work. And of course they loved it. So this image is one of the first professional images I ever took. Is out there on the cover of the book. But hey,
And it's so recognizable now. As soon as I see this image anywhere now, I know it's Paul Wilkinson. It's from being on the book and being on mastering photography, portrait photography as well. It's beautiful. It's amazing, isn't it?
But when we launched the book, we had a party here, and we invited lots and lots of people, including Ben, who is now 18 years old, 6'4", and rose for Team GB. So,
really?
and he was really pleased until he realised the other 7 people in his boat of 8 were going to royally take the mickey out of him. He was a little less pleased about it then, but there's nothing he can do about it. He signed off the image rights, and there's the cover.
That's a great story. So you've got a third one for us, Paul.
I have. Now this, we could have chosen lots and lots and lots of images. This image I chose because it represents a very particular thing that was going on, back then, and it isn't at the moment, which is I was asked some of the photographers asked me if I'd like to join their happy throng of photographing with Crystal Cruises. Yeah. And now the job is to go on the ship and take high-end portraits of the guests and clients of Crystal Cruises. And I'd never done that before. I'd never worked on a ship. For a start, you have to call it a ship, not a boat.
Yes.
It has a fore and an aft. It does not have a front and a back.
That's right.
And I learned these lessons quite quickly by asking someone, where's the front of the boat? And got severely scolded. It's fore, sir, and it's a ship. But there's lots of constraints on working on a ship. Beautiful things like you check out all of the locations, and then when you get to shoot a client, all of those locations are being used. Even one day when they're you have a calendar of events, and the calendar said the bar would be empty. I went to use the bar, and there's a professional piano player who's a guest doing concerts practicing in there. It's locked. There's a guy practicing. So although it said it was going to be free, it isn't. And so you can't pre-visualize. Even to the point where I did a shoot the one day on the ship, and I'd lined everything up because I knew kind of what I wanted the light to look like, and I'd scouted out a location. And then at the last second, we started to head into port, and the captain turned the ship by 90 degrees. It's like a very rapid sunset as you watch all of your shadows drift out of frame. And there's nothing you can do. You have to roll with it. You can't have the luxury like we do on land of knowing exactly what I can do. You don't. You pick up a camera, your client arrives, you do not know what they're going to wear. You don't know what the light's going to do. You don't know what direction the light's going to be in, and you don't know what space is available. And so, it's a proper thinking on your feet. And this was the first shoot I ever did. Svetlana, believe it or not, was one of the doctors on the ship. Wow. She was part of the medical team. And I'd asked around, and I do this every time I go on the cruise, and let's hope, touch wood, we get to do the cruises some more, because obviously right now that's not looking likely. But I always ask, is there anyone on the ship who'd like to be photographed just for fun? Any of the crew members, just for fun? Because I'd like to know what, they go for a refit and there'll be different decor, there's different team members around, and I'd like to know how they're going to react. So I always do a quick test shoot, and this was Svetlana. She is now married to the guy that ran the onboard photography shop. And so she rocked up looking like this, and we worked the ship and took pictures of her. And this was just one of them. This was midway through the shoot. She's actually resting on the concert piano in the main bar. What you see above is the shops in the surround. These aren't big ships. There's 800 people on this ship. Yeah, it's not like the big, huge Goliath ships. And that's the shot. That's what I first created, and I love it. I absolutely love it because it's so different to what I get to shoot on land. It's so creative and challenging, and you have to think so much faster, and high value too. I mean, these are really expensive shoots when you're doing them, and so that's why I've picked this shot, because it represents that first time I'd been on a ship photographing in that context.
And also, you get to kind of travel to some amazing places. I know that back in the last year, was it that you went to the Falklands?
Yeah, we did. I photographed penguins. Yeah, I tell you what, it was the coldest thing I've ever done. So you travel, the best bit, right? So we had 3 Brits. So there's Keith, who's my boss, the guy that owns the company that's got the photography concession. Yeah. And there's myself and Sarah. We get off this ship and it's cold and wet and windy, which apparently is quite a warm day for the Falklands.
Yeah.
And we had this American lady who is an onboard trainer. So she's an evangelist for photography on the ships. And she came with us. She's a friend of Keith's. So there's the 4 of us. And they put us in a Land Rover Defender. So we're going to drive out to the penguins. It's like a 3.5-hour drive to the penguins in a Land Rover. Every time we went around a bend, the Land Rover leaked on my American colleague, who had no idea why I found this hilarious. Because, of course, I need to sit in the middle.
Yeah.
It's wet, right? And the Land Rover leaks. And every time we went, but we went over the most incredible terrain. And eventually we landed next to these penguins. And I'll tell you what, penguins smell. You don't know. It's like a room full of photographers. It's awful. And you know what I mean? Why would you? All gaggling. And that's just the photographers. Penguins are very similar. And so we're out on the Falklands, and we spent a couple of hours out there. But, of course, I've been in a Land Rover now for 3.5 hours, a couple of hours of photography in the freezing cold, and eventually your bladder tells you it's time. It's time. And you've been delaying it because you can see what the gents is. The gents is literally 3 sides of corrugated tin with a tin roof and a little bit of a tin barrier at the back. That's essentially it, with a drain that runs, I don't know where the drain went, I'm assuming out into the southern Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
And so eventually I had to give up. I've got to go. But I was so cold and I was wearing 501s. So I couldn't get the damn flying done. And you know what it's like when you get really close, when you get really, really close to that point of you know that moment?
Yeah.
But I couldn't get my fly undone. And I was beginning to panic that I'm having to exert so much control and my hands are shaking. They're just shaking. It took me about 5 minutes. I nearly shouted for help. But I don't know who would have come. It wouldn't have been Sarah. Probably Keith.
Keith, yeah.
Brilliant. And my hands were just raw. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. We've travelled all over the world, seen all sorts of things. And taking photographs.
Bristol were, whether they still will this year or not, due to launch 2 new ships, weren't they? They've just been built in.
Yeah.
I do know that another one of our members, Sean Conboy, actually they generally fly them out to the shipyard as they're building them to do the interior stuff for them. So, but we'll have to see what happens there.
Genting run gambling. You know, they run casinos. They've got deep pockets. Yeah. So I would assume that, given they own those ships, that part of it will continue. What's less certain is whether there are going to be plenty of customers to go on the ships. Because, of course, with all the stories of Princess Cruises, there's been another one. The Australians, I think, are taking Princess Cruises to court, aren't they, over docking and having 200 people infected or whatever it was. And so I don't know, in the end, whether for a year or 2 there's going to be that going on. But we'll see. We'll see. We're all in this.
Yeah, and there's someone who works on cruise ships, because I might not have mentioned that in this interview, myself, not doing the same as that, but any kind of form of illness goes around the cruise ship, like don't.
Oh, yeah.
It's just right. Well, Paul, that's fantastic. Beautiful, beautiful picture. She's a beautiful, beautiful woman as well, isn't she? She's very sparkling in her eyes and everything. It's beautiful picture. So if you want to stop sharing your screen, you're going to show us an image that inspired you.
I'm going to stop sharing the screen. If I disappear, all right, just...
Okay.
We only had a 50% success rate at stopping the share so far. Am I still there?
You're still there.
Well, am I still there?
You're still there.
So this is the picture. You asked me to choose a picture that inspired me. Let me show you. There you go. Look at that.
Yeah.
Angelina Jolie, shot by Jeff. Now I'm going to say Dunas, but it might be Dunas, or it might be some other pronunciation. He's American, but I love this picture. I've loved it. I loved it. I bought this book years and years and years ago, all about lighting portraits. And you can see that's my thing. I love lighting portraits. And I bought this book. There's no date on it. There must be a date somewhere. I don't know. Anyway, that picture.
Yeah.
I just adore it. There's something about the engagement in her expression and the lighting on her that is, it's class. It's just pure class, but it's so simple. It's a couple of reflector boards and some daylight, and
one of the most beautiful women in the world as well.
Yeah, I grant you, I grant you that she's not unphotogenic. But it's not that. It's about the connection. It's actually about the way she looks and engages with the photographer. And I've had a thing about that ever since. If I'm going to take pictures, they've got to be beautifully lit. They've got to be simple. I'm not into complex. I don't need to do that. I don't do fashion photography. I don't need the big amateur dramatics to go with it. I just want to photograph people where they look like they care about you, the viewer. And that picture personified that for me. I absolutely adore it. I've adored it since I bought the book. I still adore it. When Sarah said, we're doing this, what's the picture that inspired you? That's that picture. Every time. I know exactly where it is in the book. I could get my hands on it straight. I mean, in our endless photography library back here, which is full of books. This book is still there. I still love it. It's full of really cool photography, really cool lighting diagrams.
And I actually see that in your images, and that the eyes, they're such an important part of the image that they follow you around the room, don't they? Well, that's
to do that, you have to hold someone's attention. You have to engage with them. Yeah. You have to create the connection between initially. Now, I got into trouble with this because of that picture of Pauline. Obviously, it's been online a lot, and somebody started a thread talking about you could really sense her personality, right? And I made the mistake of saying what I really think. So I'll tell you a backstory. So we had an open day, and this picture is on our wall down here at the studio. And I went downstairs and found a lady in tears. And I'm like, okay, can I get you a tissue? And I gave her a tissue, and I said, "You all right?" She said, "That's my mother." And I said, "Oh, is it?" I knew Frances, her daughter, got a sister, but I didn't realize she's in the studio. No, she said, "Not really. She's not actually my mother. It's just my mother." And it got me thinking that actually when you create a portrait, you create a reaction, but it's not, I know that person, unless you do actually know that person. Yeah. What happens is you get an echo of your own life's experiences, the people you've met. So to somebody else, that could be a really strict school teacher, or it could be a physician or a lecturer, or just someone that served them in a coffee shop. Each of us will have our own experience with that picture. But as a portrait photographer, if you capture it well, you create a connection between a viewer that you've never met and your picture.
Yeah.
Anyway, I made the mistake of putting that on a thread and got railed for it. It's like, it's my picture. I'm allowed to have that opinion. You're wrong. You definitely captured the personality of the lady. I said, you don't even know that. We've never met the lady. How do you know? She could have been an axe murderer for all you know.
And what was the lesson you learned there?
Yeah, keep your mouth shut.
So, Paul, we've got a couple of minutes left.
Right.
Because we've way overrun, as I expected.
All right.
So obviously this will go live in the next 7 to 10 days, but when I say live, we'll put it in the community. So we're in now, as we record this, week 3 of the lockdown. Is it week 3?
It is. We're just starting week 3.
Which feels like 3 months to me, to be honest. So we're asking people that we're talking to, what advice you would give to fellow members? And we're all in the same boat, so to speak, but what's keeping you sane? What are you concentrating on? What advice would you give? As a very successful portrait photographer, what would you say to be doing right now?
Okay. Well, the first thing I just want to say before I say what we're doing is I'm finding it really hard to know the tone to take with these questions because I'm getting asked that a lot.
Yeah.
I said this on the podcast the other day as well. It's very easy to be overly joyous and flippant and saying, you've got to be positive and you've got to be doing this, you've got to be doing that, and all of those messages. Well, there are a lot of people out there suffering, really suffering. I mean, illness suffering.
Yes.
And our NHS friends, the people in the health service, are working flat out to try and keep people alive.
Yes.
So me being flippant about it is clearly not great. Equally, being negative and morose and maudlin is not helpful either, because that's not going to get us anywhere. So it's hard to know the tone, but what I've taken to doing actually is I'm working flat out. If anything, I'm up earlier, I'm working longer hours, partly because it's something I can control. I can't control coronavirus, COVID-19. I can't control our government's reaction to it. I can't control the economics of the situation at this stage. I'm completely powerless. And so what I'm doing is taking control of bits of my life, bits of my business, and saying, I own that. I'm going to do stuff with it. I'm going to use the time productively. I'm not going to sit around. You know, the weather's really nice. I did actually spend a day yesterday, you know, sanding down garden furniture and having
Which,
a
bath. To be fair, was a Sunday. So it was
a Sunday.
Yes.
But the rest of the time, actually, I'm working flat out to make sure that I'm doing stuff that's pushing us forward. So I'm working on mastering portrait photography and the website and the assets to go with it. I'm working on the stuff for our business. At some point, I'll revamp the website. That's on my list now to do. I'm sort of started that process. And I don't know when this will end. I don't know how this will end. I don't know what the economics of the situation will be. I do not know what money we'll have left in our coffers at the end of it, because there's no photography going on, actually.
Yeah.
So all I can do is take the punt that if we're still standing and if there's an economy to sell photography in, I want to be at the front of the pack, not the back. Absolutely. And so I'm doing everything I can to stay at the front.
Yes.
You know, we worked really hard to put our business there in the first place. And so that's the target. And it's a combination of determination and positivity, visualizing that this is going to be all right, but also with the reality check that for a lot of people, this is not good. And the respect to the situation that is, you know, I'm not saying you shouldn't be joyous or I shouldn't be joyous. I just find it really hard. Yeah, I've watched one or two things out there and it's just, you know what, that doesn't really take into account I've got lots of NHS clients.
Yes.
Doctors, surgeons, consultants, nurses. And I know the life they're living right now. And so all respect to them.
My daughter being one of them.
Of course. Yeah, of course. And so it's really hard, isn't it? You know, on the one hand, I want to be really joyous and say, get on with this and do this. And on the other hand, well, out of respect for the people who are...
Funny enough, I spoke to my daughter last night, who is on the front line. She's a radiographer. And strangely euphoric. And I think it's just the madness of the hours that they're having to do in there. And my daughter's 23 and she's seen things that you would only really see in a war situation. It's terrifying. But
it's not just COVID-19. It's the people that, for instance, have had their cancer treatments delayed.
Yeah.
For how long, you know?
Yeah.
Imagine that. You're told you've got cancer, but we're not going to do anything about it for 6 months.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's as terrifying as being diagnosed with coronavirus. And so there's an awful lot going on, and all credit to your daughter and everybody else who's involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so, we're being really positive. I'm, as always, driven and optimistic. Of course I am, because being negative about it doesn't help you. It doesn't change the outcome. I can't change the outcome. The only thing I can change is how I live it, and then the position I'm in when and if everything returns back to whatever the normality is then. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Paul Wilkinson, thank you very much for your time. I will at some point going to put the outtakes of some of the interviews I've done as well in a separate one, and I might even include the ones that you did for us when you did the judging as well, because that was hilarious. You remember sending me those?
Oh, shush! No, you can't. No, I've forgotten I'd sent those. They're in your eyes only.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll see.
About 85 takes, and the team kept laughing. You can't say that. Every time I said something, you can't say that. I haven't said anything bad. You can't say that. So, yeah.
It was the laughing. It was just the laughing. As always, we laughed so much. And I managed to get through that interview without a nosebleed, which is after spending a week with you in Italy, where I had constant nosebleeds from laughing. It's. I'm
going to say, I'm pleased for qualifying that. I didn't punch you.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay. Thank you, Paul.
My pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure.